The question is that this House do now adjourn. Wendy Chamberlain.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. There are 2 million older people living in poverty, and that is 1 in 6. And another million are sitting just above the poverty line, silently struggling to make ends meet. And together, a quarter of older people are in or are at risk of being in poverty. And during recent years, the phrase heating or eating has become shorthand for the cost of living crisis. It rhymes and it's easy to say, but this is the reality that is facing too many of our pensioners. Age UK research found that 4.2 million people cut back on food or groceries last year, whilst a survey by this House's Petitions Committee of those engaging in petitions on pensions levels found that 3/4 were worried about affording food. Now, health statistics always worsen in the cold winter months, with mortality rising in all parts of the UK last year compared to previously. And as we face an even colder winter, in my constituency of North East Fife, we are often reaching minus temperatures overnight. There are very real consequences when older people can't afford to properly heat their homes. The reality, Madam Deputy Speaker, is that heating or eating is not a catchphrase. It's a decision about survival, and it is our duty as policymakers in this place to ask why this is a reality for so many of our older people and to find solutions for this. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, I welcome the Government's eventual decision to keep the triple lock this year, but the lack of clarity and uncertainty about that decision did appear to be electorally motivated, and I would argue caused a great deal of anxiety for many older constituents.
Will the honourable member give way?
Happy to give way to my honourable friend.
I'm grateful to the honourable member who is talking about the triple lock on pensions. I've heard it said in this House just in recent months that the triple lock on pensions was a Conservative proposal. So I went to the library to find out if that was true. I've got here the 2010 manifesto, which talks about restoring the link between the state pension and earnings, and the 2010 Liberal Democrat manifesto, which talks about uprating the state pension annually by whichever is the higher of growth in earnings, prices, or 2.5%. Does she agree with me that it was a Lib Dem proposal?
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for that intervention. I meet regularly with Steve Webb, the former Lib Dem Pensions Minister from the Coalition, and I know how hard he worked when he was in government on this policy, so I entirely agree with him. I thank him for his intervention. The triple lock is no use to anyone, though, Madam Deputy Speaker, if the Government can't get its systems working in order to pay people what they are due. And repeatedly last year, we learnt of pensioners nearing or reaching pension age, trying to top up their national insurance records and seeing their money disappear without a trace. It would appear again some weeks later, but only often after chasing by an MP, an advisor or by media coverage. And, Madam Deputy Speaker, this wasn't just 1 or 2 cases. What became apparent were systematic problems of jammed helplines and hundreds upon hundreds of people losing track of their savings as they paid them over to the Government. So can I ask the Minister in his response to tell us what he is doing to properly resource the future pension centre? Grateful to give way.
Sorry, thank you very much. I thank the honourable member for giving me. She's making a very strong point and a very excellent speech. But on that point of savings and topping up national insurance, we are hearing that something like 2/3 of those over the age of 64 are dipping into their savings just to keep going. They're cutting down on their food and they're eating less healthily. Apart from the cruelty we're showing to pensioners and forcing them into this position, is the Government not being short-sighted and not seeing the implications for the NHS, the welfare system, social care, of treating our pensioners so badly?
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for giving way. I think this is reflective across a number of policy areas, that sufficiency of income and allowing people to live with dignity and respect and knowing that they can cover the essentials is something that we should be looking to do for all of our services and for pensioners as well as other age groups too.
Further to that point.
I'm grateful to give way to the honourable member for Strangford. It's not an adjournment debate, but
Madam Deputy Speaker, I wish to congratulate the honourable lady for North East Fife. She always brings things to this House and to the Westminster Hall, things which are bread and butter issues, which I support. I'm glad to come along and add my support to the honourable lady tonight. The price of electricity rising in Northern Ireland by 20%, pensions rising only by 8.5%, similar increase in the cost of meat and veg. It's clear that those comfortable on their pension in 2020 will be substantially less comfortable now. Does the Honourable not agree that an investigation into energy prices must take place, as currently people feel they are being gouged every time they put on their light or gas, and feel the pain of prioritising one necessity over another?
Grateful to the Honourable Member for Strangford for his intervention. I agree that it does feel for many people that they are being held hostage by the vagaries of the energy prices and systems, and although the cap and other measures have gone some way to helping with that, there's no doubt that it's a huge challenge. It also demonstrates why the triple lock remains required.
Just while we're on the subject of energy prices, I'm acutely aware, Madam Deputy Speaker, that as we speak, pensioners in my constituency in Orkney and Shetland are having to brave really very serious snow conditions, and they will feel, because we have the highest level of fuel poverty anywhere in the country, literally and metaphorically out in the cold. Does she agree with me that Ofgem have a role to play here in the creation of a social tariff or even a geographically based tariff?
I'm grateful to the Right Honourable Member for his intervention. I think one of the challenges with his constituency is how many of his constituents are off-grid, and we know that there is a lack of regulation in the sector off-grid, and as well as that, one of the challenges for the government in responding to the energy price fluctuations was getting a lot of money out to many people easily, but the administrative issues that then materialised for those in off-grid circumstances, many of whom still haven't seen the money to which they are entitled. We need to be looking at better regulation of our energy system. So I was talking about the Future Pensions Centre, Madam Deputy Speaker, and the challenges that many constituents across the UK have experienced in topping up their pensions. And indeed, I did table a presentation bill on the issue to extend the deadline, and I was very glad that the government took that up. But I would like to ask the Minister in his response to tell us what discussions he is having with HMRC about making their systems align and function properly. If those systems were working alongside, many constituents wouldn't have a gap to fill in the first instance. And will he consider implementing a proper receipting system so that older people have proof of payment, like as they do with any other transaction? Because we know, Madam Deputy Speaker, that errors by DWP are all too commonplace, and we only need to look through the experience of the WASPy women to show that. Women who, through no fault of their own, lost out on their ability to plan for their retirements, who lost their financial autonomy, many of whom continue to live in poverty, whilst others have sadly died without seeing any compensation. And I know that we are all waiting the final report of the Ombudsman, setting out its recommendations in relation to the compensation for WASPy women. But in the meantime, would the Minister agree to meet with me to discuss next steps? He and I have worked together successfully on the APPG for ending the need for food banks before he took on his current role, and I hope that we could do so again. But returning to pension income, I do want to raise the issue of pension credit with the Minister. This top-up benefit is the simplest tool at the Government's disposal to lift pensioners who are in poverty out of it. And it does feel like every year we have a new attempt at increasing uptake with a fancy leaflet or other information campaign, and I'm sure we all go to the drop-ins and get our pictures taken and we share them with our constituents. But take-up for pension credit remains stuck at 63%, which suggests that the campaigns to date simply aren't working. It means that pensioners either don't know about the benefit, don't realise that they are eligible, or for some they do struggle with the stigma of being seen to claim it. But I've been in this role for over 3 years now, and I've spent a lot of time having conversations about how to improve uptake, and clearly an annual leaflet isn't doing the trick. What we need is a long-term strategy on pension credit uptake with two key focuses. How do we share data to identify those people that are eligible for pension benefit? And then how do we target them efficiently and effectively so that they actually do claim it and don't feel stigmatised in doing so?
On that point? Sorry.
Yeah, grateful to Honourable Member for Strangford.
Can I just say to them, it's an absolutely critical point. I know whenever I talk to my pensioners in my constituency of Strangford, I always say always tell what benefits are on, and I always mention attendance allowance if they're not in DLA, and I always mention about pension credit. In many cases they aren't on it, and I say to myself, how do we make a better system? I would suggest that maybe what the department needs to do with great respect is to actively, physically go to those people who aren't on and introduce it to them. Because many people are proud, they're independent, they don't want to be taking up the stake because they think they shouldn't do so, but they should. because they worked hard all their days, they paid their tax, they paid their national insurance. It's time for payback.
Grateful to the honourable member. Yes, I think stigma is definitely a part of it, but I think for some they do think that they just don't qualify, that they have a sufficiency of income that would mean that they were rejected. And I always say to them, even if it is only something like 50 pence, it's worth doing because the passporting benefits make that worthwhile. But I think this is also a challenge that we've seen around issues such as child benefit, where having not seen the increase in the thresholds for child benefit, we're in this ludicrous situation where we have a single earner earning over £60,000, that means that the household aren't entitled. But the challenge then is if the non-paying parent or non-earning parent doesn't apply, they don't get their national insurance contributions for their pension. And why would people apply for something that they don't think that they're entitled to? We must do more to make it easier for people to get what they're entitled to and not end up 20 years down the line finding out that they don't have full pension contributions, because we know topping up is quite challenging, because I've already talked about that. But going on to back to pension credit, perhaps a next step for the Minister, once his department has published the results of last summer's trials and targeting recipients of housing benefit, he could perhaps give us an update on the outcome of that trial, so that we can see whether what's been done in relation to housing benefit might work for pension credit and what lessons can be learned. Missing out on pension credit has serious financial implications beyond the credit itself. As I've already mentioned, it's the main passporting benefit for older people for cost of living payments. So whilst we focus on a long-term strategy for pension credit, will the Minister consider extending entitlement to those payments to those older people who are in receipt of housing benefit and council tax reduction, for example? Because I suspect that if they are eligible for those things, they're probably eligible for pension credit too. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, before I move on to a long-term strategy to tackle pension or poverty, I just wanted to raise one more benefit-related point with the Minister. And I know this, strictly speaking, isn't in his portfolio, but will the Minister commit to going away and providing the House with an update on the future of the Household Support Fund? I know from English colleagues that there is significant distress at the prospect of it not being renewed in March. Madam Deputy Speaker, I want to dispute a claim made by the Minister's colleague in a written question response to me yesterday, where it was stated that pensioner poverty is falling. It is not. Indeed, the claim was based on statistics before housing costs, which I would argue is distinctly disingenuous. Increasingly, pensioners are facing high housing costs as more and more continue to rent privately into older age. Twice as many rent now than a decade ago, a trend which is set to continue as it is harder and harder for young people to get onto the housing ladder. So whilst we must tackle the poverty immediately in front of us, we need to look at the long-term drivers of poverty amongst pensioners and stop this trend in its tracks. There are two parts to this. That's making sure that people enter retirement sufficiently equipped and ensuring that no one falls into poverty after ending their working lives. And ultimately, our experiences during our working lives determine what happens to us when we retire. If you've had to take a period of time out of work or only working part-time because of ill health, child rearing or caring, then you will be substantially worse off in retirement. And of course, those last two reasons are incredibly gendered, with women most likely to be missing out on savings for their retirement. Yep, grateful to give way to the honourable member.
It was right earlier on to highlight the benefits of the coalition government introducing the triple lock, which this year will mean an uptick of between £650 and £1,000 for pensioners. But also the coalition government had also introduced mandatory pension contributions and pension from employers. And does she not think that is a sort of long-term planning that will make a difference in terms of helping this generation be in a better place financially when they retire?
And I'm assuming he's referring to automatic enrolment. If he waits, I will mention that. I'm not going to let it go amiss. But just if I can return briefly, Madam Deputy Speaker, to the gender pay gap. The government's own research puts that the pensions gap, not the pay gap, the gender pensions gap at 35%. And I would argue we could call this the caring gender gap, because indeed life is arguably more complicated for retirees with caring responsibilities. I'm not just thinking about older couples who increasingly rely on each other as their health starts to deteriorate, but people who move into retirement while carrying on caring for their adult children or for other family members. Indeed, I've written been written to by constituents protesting out of the injustice of having lost out on the opportunity to build up retirement savings and now moving into pension age, losing their carers allowance, but still continuing to provide unpaid care to their loved ones, whilst others in their cohort settle into a more comfortable retirement. I would like to see a comprehensive plan from the government across departments to tackle this unfairness. Are there ways of bringing unpaid carers into auto-enrolment through a credit scheme? Could we increase the employer contribution to auto-enrolment to help build the savings of those in low-paid work? How can we simply encourage more carers back into the workplace? Now, I was proud to pass the Carers Leave Act last year, but that isn't enough. We need policies on issues such as staying in touch days, and we need a carers allowance that incentivises work. And I look forward to meeting with a colleague of the Minister's on just that. But there's definitely an education piece here. Auto-enrolment was an incredible policy, but it also means that people don't really think about their pensions. And the Money and Pension Service estimates that 22 million people say they don't know enough to plan for their retirement. While DWP research last year found that attitudes to pensions are characterised by detachment, fear and complacency. And I actually think that those views would be represented in this place as well, Madam Deputy Speaker, certainly when I think about my different things that I've done before I came to this place and the different pension pots that I have. Now, I understand this. Planning for retirement is difficult and complicated unless you're an actuary or a financial specialist. I can hear the response of my teenage children if I try to bring it up at home or see the eyes glaze over on the doorstep. But the result of not engaging in something is something people do care about. So my challenge to the Minister is to bridge that gap, to change our culture so that knowing about your pension is normal and not scary and a standard part of people's financial planning and education. So I'd be interested to hear the Minister's ideas, but I'll just put one to him which keeps coming up when I speak with experts and stakeholders. Will he consider a trial to test the impact of automatically booking savers for pensions guidance appointments when they turn 50? Let's try and make it easy, because lots of things can happen to you in retirement. Your health can change. You could be bereaved or divorced. You could become a carer. The economy could be crashed, causing a sustained cost of living crisis. To try and understand drivers of poverty amongst older people, independent age followed the outcomes for a cohort of pensioners who entered state pension age above the poverty line. Within 10 years, almost half had fallen into poverty. Something else is clearly happening there that we need to understand. I've talked a lot about different moving parts to the overall pension and poverty landscape. And what we need clearly, what older people need, is a comprehensive plan. So I'll end, Madam Deputy Speaker, by asking the Minister this. Will he consider a cross-government review of what supports an older person needs to stay out of poverty? And will he bring Westminster up to the standards of other nations and support a Westminster Commissioner for Older People and Agency? I'd like to get something done here, and I'm sure he would too. I look forward to hearing his response.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I congratulate the Honourable Lady on securing her debate. I'm always happy to meet her, as she well knows. I think I've been given 8 minutes, is that correct, to respond? 41, indeed. I've been misinformed, Madam Deputy Speaker. You get more of me than I anticipated. I will do my best to reply to all her points where I can. Now, as she will know, we have both toured the United Kingdom looking at issues around poverty, food banks in Hackney, in Newcastle. I have toured North East Fife and thoroughly enjoyed myself. She has come to Blackpool to see the situation on the ground in Blackpool, which I hope she equally enjoyed. So I know how passionately she feels about this. I hope she knows how passionately I do as well. So I'm more than happy, as I said, to meet with her. She has come up with so many ideas in her speech today that I can almost not do justice to all of them, but let me do my best to try and touch on some of them in the time we have available. Government fully recognises the challenges facing pensioners due to the higher cost of living, and we're committed to action that helps to alleviate levels of pensioner poverty. We're taking significant steps to ease financial pressures by providing total support of £104 billion over 2022 to 2025 to help households with a high cost of bills. In 23-24, we will spend over £152 billion, 5.6% of GDP, on benefits for pensioners, including £125.4 billion on the state pension alone. Tackling high inflation remains a core priority for the government. At its peak, inflation was 11.1%. The latest ONS data shows we've reduced inflation to 3.9%, Good news for everyone, but particularly for pensioners, for whom inflation bears down particularly hard, in my view. We also recognise the exceptional circumstances of the last 2 years, and we've committed to providing timely relief to those who need it most, which has been especially important during these inflationary pressures. We've provided one of the largest support packages in Europe, including 2 rounds of cost of living payments. Over 8 million UK households on eligible means-tested benefits, including an estimated 1.4 million pensioner households, may receive additional cost of living payments totaling up to £900 in the current financial year. 8.9 million pensioner households across the UK will also have received an additional £300 cost of living payment this winter as a top-up to their winter fuel payment, worth a total of £4.8 billion. Now, the government remains committed to ensuring that older people can live with the dignity and respect they deserve. I was an MP during the coalition. We achieved many things. Jointly, I happen to think that there's a good record that we can both reflect on. So I won't get into a fight over whose idea was what when and who first made a comment when. I don't think that actually does the joint endeavours that we engaged upon much credit at all. But we have stuck with the triple lock. It increased by 8.5% in April 2024, and that followed the 10.1% increase in April 2023. The standard minimum guarantee and pension credit will also increase by 8.5%. And like her, I often meet Steve Webb and listen to him very, very carefully. He is a wise man indeed. Now, pension credit, I know she focused on quite a lot, as do I, for that matter. It provides invaluable financial support to around 1.4 million households, claiming around 5.4 billion in pension credit. The latest take-up figures, she is right, estimate take-up of pension credit to be 63%. They are based on cohort estimates, so they're not quite as accurate as I would like them to be. It's often very hard to try to identify actual take-up, unfortunately. One of the deficits in our data system, in my view. But the take-up of the guarantee credit element, which is perhaps the main safety net, is actually at 70%. Now, in my view, we can always do more. We always talk in benefit circles about stock and flow. The flow of new pensioners coming onto the system, we need one approach to make sure that they are signposted speedily and early to the existence of pension credit and whether it's right for them. But then we also have the stock. It's the stock we've been trying to focus on in recent years, not least by the advertising campaigns that she referenced. I'm sad to hear that Harry Redknapp didn't get a mention of his fantastic video that we put out on social media. But she's also right that we've been looking at more targeted efforts, including writing to the housing benefit claimants. That's a very important trial run. I don't have the results yet. I want them yesterday because I think they're that important, but I want to make sure that the data is properly validated and actually means something, and we can then take decisions on it. But even so, the work we've done already, I think, has improved the uptake. The quarterly caseload statistics has shown a rise in the number of households in receipt of pension credit after around 12 years of caseload being in decline. I can't say that's entirely down to our campaign. I think Martin Lewis can probably take a claim of this share on his ITV series, but I agree entirely there's much, much more creative things we can do, and maybe we can cover some of those ideas in our meeting when we get round to it. She also made a point around topping up NI and the issues around that. We're looking at introducing online services that allow people to make their own payment for voluntary national insurance contributions directly to HMRC. I hear the point she makes around receipting and the proper provisioning of the service. She is quite right to do so, and it will be uppermost in my mind as we go forward. I could talk for half an hour on the gender pensions gap. I'm not sure I'd have half an hour at all to talk about that. But I think, as the point I would make is we all know that that pension gap is there. That was part of the reason why auto-enrolment has been introduced to try to address that pension gap over time. In 2012, 40% of eligible women were participating in the workplace pension. 10 years on, that's increased to 86%. That shows auto-enrolment has been a great success. In my view, it's a work in progress, though. There are still groups in society who are under-saving, even those who are participating in auto-enrolment, and women and those with caring responsibilities are at the forefront of my mind. She may have seen a report by Scottish Widows back in November that identified these. So I've had multiple discussions within my department over what we're going to do about each particular group, so that's of particular interest to me as well. I think the other point I would also make, just around pensioner poverty and poverty indicators, which we can argue about till the cows come home, I suspect. Latest statistics show that in 2021 to 2022, there were 200,000 fewer pensioners in absolute poverty after housing costs than in 2009-10. Average pensioner incomes have grown in real terms, and in 2021 to 2022, average net income of all pensioners was £349 per week after housing costs, compared to £335 in 2009-10. As I've outlined, the government takes both the cost of living pressures facing pensioners and pensioner poverty extremely seriously. The amount we're spending is clear, but I recognise that the task will never end. That she's quite right, I think also the member for Stratford mentioned it, and she and I discovered this on our tours around the country, that she will have been sick of hearing me talk about trying to identify people upstream the soonest that something occurs, when the state can intervene and help them, rather than wait for issues to accumulate further and further down the track where the cost to the public purse is that much higher. That's very much the spirit in which I've embarked upon this particular part of our ministerial journey. Many of the questions she's been raising have been questions I've been raising in my introductory meetings, and now I'm getting a chance to put some of those ideas into practice. So when she and I meet, I will be in listening mode and look forward to hearing some of her ideas a bit further. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
The question is that this House do now adjourn, as many as that opinion say aye. Aye. The ayes have it. Order, order.
The proceeding has ended. 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 The proceeding has ended.